Well, good morning, everybody. It's great to be here. Some of you, a very few of you, will know that I was a regular at these services in about 2005 and to 2008. It's a long time ago. I did have a 16-year break because of work commitments, but started coming back again February this year. And I just want to thank you for the way that you have welcomed me and helped me to feel part of the Inspire services, and that's been a wonderful blessing to me. I retired again at the end of January, and one of the things that I do, I don't know if you found this, is I like to reflect back on the journey that I've been. And especially as I reflect back about my walk with God, it came to my mind that during the various seasons of my life, there were some particular parts of Scripture that God used to build foundations of how I would walk with Him. As I've thought about it, I think of that Psalm 119 verse 105 that says, "Thy word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path." And so this morning, I thought I'd like to share with you one of those foundations that in my life was laid very early in my teenage years. But these foundations are applicable to us in any stage of our life. And it revolves around Psalm 23. And so we're going to visit Psalm 23 this morning, probably go over the words a few times, because I want us to go past, oh, that's familiar, I know it, and to think about what it says. So if you have a Bible or a device that you want to follow on, it'll be on the screen as well. Let's read Psalm 23. "The Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He refreshes my soul. He guides me along the right paths for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows. Surely your goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever." This is a psalm written by King David. And as we read those words, it's like an invitation to look at the intimacy of his relationship with God in each and every season of his life. This foundation, this passage became very significant to me when I was about 14 years of age. When I was 14, let me just go back one step. Before we talk about the psalm, one of the things we need to do is to just think about what we think of as a sheep and a shepherd. Because our Australian context of sheep farming is quite different. We think of big paddocks and big mobs of sheep and quad bikes and sheep dogs and, in Australia, I've yet to meet a sheep farmer who knows all of his sheep by name. In fact, they don't even give them names. And if that's your picture of shepherds and sheep, then let's just park that to one side and think about the eastern shepherd of the biblical times that were there. They had a smaller flock. They didn't have fences and paddocks. They would travel with the sheep. They would guide them. They would care for them. They would protect them. They did know them by name, and the sheep knew the shepherd by his voice and would follow him. And when we think about this psalm, we need to think about that sort of shepherd situation as well. Well, as I said, this became very relevant to me at 14 years of age. Those of you who've got a long Baptist connection might remember that we used to have youth exchanges when we were young people growing up in churches. I think it was the Baptist way of helping people find people to marry. because it was really good for stirring the gene pool across Queensland. And I can remember at 14, the youth leader at Inala Baptist Church, where my family and I were part of, came to me and said, "Stephen, I think it's about time that you have your first go at preaching." And he came early in the year and he said, "This year we're going on youth exchange to Chinchilla, and I would like you to bring the message." And I thought that was interesting. Later on I learnt that when you had young people in church, you got them to preach as far away as possible from the home church first to see how they go. And then if they did all right, you might get a chance at home. But anyway, it was really interesting. And as a 14-year-old, I started to think, okay, what would I want to speak about? And I thought, Psalm 23, everybody knows Psalm 23. I know Psalm 23. Why don't I choose to speak about that? And so that was going to be my text. I thought it was a safe choice. I thought, it'd just be a pleasant activity. But my life's journey over the next few months made it anything but a safe choice and a pleasant journey because of the things that unfolded there. This picture of the shepherd is not limited to Psalms and to King David. It's throughout the Bible. It's a very powerful image that God wants us to realise in terms of him being our shepherd. It's one of those things that we need to focus on and to not allow it to become over familiar, but to actually go to the depths of it. In fact, the Lord Jesus himself was very clear about him being our shepherd, and he used that image to talk about his ministry and the relationship that he wanted to have with us. Those who wrote in the New Testament always talked about Jesus as our shepherd. For example, in Hebrews 13:20, he talks about the great shepherd, the one who cares for all our needs. 1 Peter 5:4 talks about the chief shepherd who provides for our future. And probably one of the most famous New Testament texts in John chapter 10, where Jesus goes and explains that he is the good shepherd, the one who came to his sheep and to give his very life for his sheep. He used the picture of a shepherd to illustrate his purpose of coming to save those who, without him, would be lost. He talked about his willingness to lay down his life for his sheep. And he talked about the fact that others might come and offer protection and a way forward, but they were false shepherds. John 10:4 says this: when he has brought out his own, he goes on ahead of them, and his sheep follow him because they know his voice. So let's think about the psalm itself and look at the structure. This is an easy structure in a sense because it's got pictures. Some of us like reading and some of us like pictures. And this psalm is a picture psalm. And there are two main pictures that we see in the psalm. The first one is the shepherd caring for his sheep. And then the second one is of a host of a banquet and people coming people coming around the table of this great banquet table. And so what we see here is that the Lord is our shepherd in all seasons of life. In verse 2 and 3 of the psalm, first of all we see this, what I think is an idyllic picture. It's a picture of green pastures and still waters. There's no suggestion that the sheep are anxious because they're lying down, they're at rest. It's a season of health. It talks about the shepherd restoring their souls. It's the season where the shepherd is leading them in the way of righteousness, leading them the way to go. And I don't know about you, but those sorts of seasons sound pretty good. They're a season where things are going well and where God is there. Of course, if we think about ourselves, sometimes in those seasons we're tempted to forget about God because things are going well. And the psalmist is reminding us that in those times God is being our shepherd and we should acknowledge that. But it goes on into verse 4 to talk about another season with the shepherd and his sheep. And this time the picture is much more harsh, much more severe, much more challenging. It talks about walking through the valley of the shadow of death. What a confronting image for these sheep who are going through a journey where they are threatened on all sides. And yet, the psalmist says that during these seasons with the shepherd, that he would fear no evil because God is with him. The presence of the shepherd brings such hope and strength in those seasons. God is not a passive bystander in those seasons of the valley of the shadow of death, but actively involved in our struggles. David was drawing on his own shepherding experience and the story of David as a young man out looking after the sheep. And he talks about the shepherd with his rod and his staff will comfort us. And so the picture of the rod was like a heavy truncheon or stick that a shepherd would have to deal with those who would come and bring threats to the sheep. If you read the early story of David in 1 Samuel 17, he went out and fought bears and lions and he would have used his rod. The staff is slightly different, a long narrow stick with a sort of a hood or a hook on the end of it. And the role for the eastern shepherd of the staff was to guide and direct the sheep. He could actually use them to send them one way or the other. And then at times when he needed to move them, he could use the hook at the end to pick them up and to redirect them and to change them from where they're going. So David is reflecting on his life. I think this is a mature David looking back at life and saying, there have been seasons where God has just blessed me so much. There have been green pastures. But there have also been times where I was really in fear that my life would not continue with the enemies that came against me. And yet God continued to guide me and direct me. He continued to give me hope. He continued to guide me in the way that he would have me to go. And then verse 5 and 6 actually changes the picture. And in verses 5 and 6 we see there, you prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. And here we see almost like a victory table. These enemies that were there in the valley of the shadow of death are no longer a threat. In fact, David is being honoured by God, the host. He is at this table. And it's got an eternal perspective because he says, you anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows. And then he says this, surely goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. So there is a sense of which David is looking at his life's journey and saying there are times when it's going really well. There are times when it's just desperate. But I live in this life because the hope to come is that God has a table for me and he will recognise me. If I wanted to summarise those three pictures in one word or one sentence, it might be something like this. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Verse 1 of what we're reading. I can remember preparing this message as a 14-year-old. I think when you're 14, you just don't think about the bigger picture, do you? You're sort of in your own little world. And so I don't know if I would do this as an older person, but I decided I would give the people at Chinchilla some education about what sheep were like. Now, you've got to realise that I grew up in Housing Commission Estate in Inala, had lived in the city all my life, and I never thought that maybe all these farmers with sheep and whatever would laugh at me, and they didn't. They were very generous, but I thought, okay, maybe as I think about this psalm, it's helpful to think about me being the sheep, or us being sheep and what it's like. And so I actually had a number of points about what sheep are like and how it relates to us. The first one was this, that sheep have a very poor sense of direction. Sheep just don't seem to know the right way to go. And I thought about the prophet Isaiah, who speaks about our situation and circumstance when he says, we all are like sheep, we've gone astray. Each of us has turned to his own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. I then said, well, sheep don't only have don't have a sense of direction, but they can't actually clean themselves. And so if you have the sheep out in the paddocks and they're going through the briars and the thorns and the brushes, it all gets caught up in their wool. And sheep don't have a good system of grooming, or they don't come over to each other and help each other out. What happens is that they're dependent upon the shepherd to take away those things. And then I thought, well, the Bible says for us too, if we're like sheep, maybe we can't clean ourselves. Maybe we are stained and affected by sin and its impact on our life. Paul wrote in Romans 3:23, we've all sinned. We've all fallen short of the glory of God. So just as sheep needed a shepherd, we need a shepherd who will come and help us there. Another thought that I had was this, that sheep don't have a natural form of defence. Most animals are pretty clever and they have some way of defending themselves, whether it's sharp claws or venomous bites or excellent camouflage or very fast. The poor old sheep don't seem to have any natural form of defence. Although if you meet an angry ram on a bad day and turn your back, they can bunt you. I've heard that from somebody in my family who had that experience. But in general, they're defenceless. And the Bible says that we too are really in that situation as well. Why is it that Jesus teaches us to pray, lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil? Because we need God to be at work helping us to face the threats and the challenges in our life. And Peter talks about the devil. He says this in Peter 5:8, your enemy the lion prowls around like a roaring lion looking for someone to devour. If we're like sheep, then we need to have a shepherd. In the eastern situation, the sheep weren't very self-reliant. They were dependent. They were dependent for the shepherd to find food and water for them to eat. And we too need God to guide us in the way that we need to go to provide what we need. And then another one, and I'm not sure on all the details, but I did read somewhere that in the Middle East, sometimes when a sheep gets injured and it can't fix itself, that's where the shepherd steps in. And I can remember reading the account of a sheep, or of sheep when they break their leg, for example. It would be the shepherd that would take the sheep and splint the leg of the sheep. And it had two impacts. One was this, that sheep had to stay particularly close to the shepherd, but to navigate the rough countryside. And it was also that when the going got too tough, it would be the shepherd who would pick up the sheep and put him on his shoulders. All we like sheep. And I think there is something there. But as I was preparing for that sermon and thinking about it, I came face to face with the reality that we can look at Christian truth in a way of understanding in our head. And yet, what is the bridge that takes it from our head to our heart? How is it that it becomes part of who we are rather than just something that we can talk about? And for me and for my family, in that very season, the events in our family meant that it had to go from our head, or my head, to the heart. The 23rd of March 1971 started off as a normal day in our household. My dad went off to work. I went off to school at Inala High School. Don't anybody hold that against me. And so I'm sitting in class at school, and somebody comes down from the office and talks to the teacher and brings this message. Tell Stephen Ball he's got to report to the office and make sure he takes his bags with him. And in my school, it normally meant that you were being expelled for something. And I couldn't think of anything that I'd done that would have deserved that sort of punishment. But anyway, I got sent to the office with my bag over my shoulder. I walked across the car park in front of the principal's office, and I couldn't believe it. There, sitting in the car, was a family friend, a lady called Nell Solomon, and she's sitting in my school, and I had no idea why she was there. I said, "Oh, Mrs. Solomon, what are you doing at my school?" And she said, "Just go to the office." And so I didn't know what was going to happen. I walked into the office, and they said, "Just go straight into the principal's office." And I walked into the principal's office, and there, sitting in the principal's chair, wasn't my principal. It was our family friend, the Reverend Stan Solomon, who was sitting there. And he said, "Stephen, I've got some bad news for you. Your dad was killed at work today." My dad was a welder on big earth-moving equipment. He was working on some equipment, and there'd been some slippage or fall, and he'd been killed at work. It sort of just hits you like a brick. I don't remember too much. I remember saying, "I've got to go home." And they said, "That's right." And I said, "But I've got my push bike here. I have to ride home." And they said, "Okay." And I had about 3 or 4 kilometres to ride on my push bike. It was a pretty wild ride, but in Inala you never left your push bike anywhere because it would get stolen if you didn't look after it. I can remember walking through the front door, and there was my mum, my 5 younger siblings, aged from 1 to 9. My mum was 33 at the time. And it was just surreal. Like, they were sitting in the corner, all bunched together, and there was just this great amount of sadness. It was sad too because we had no relatives in Australia. We were a migrant family. All our extended family were in England. We did have friends, and we had church family who were there as well. And we had no money really. My dad worked hard to support our family, but we really lived from week to week. And so all of a sudden, our life changed in a single day. What do you do when you hit those sorts of bumps in the road? Do you blame God? Do you say, "God, why have you let all this happen to me? Why have you let this happen to my family?" Or do you take the truth of Psalm 23 and discover in your deepest need that what God says in his word is true in your experience? He wants to supply all of our needs. And so over the next number of months, difficult as they were, myself and my family discovered that physically, socially, emotionally, spiritually, God was sufficient for my family. I told you I want to keep coming back to Psalm 23, and I want to read Psalm 23 again, but I want you to think about what God is saying that he will provide for us. Psalm 23, starting at verse 2, says this: "He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters." And I've got here, the Lord provides rest. The Lord provides refreshment. He restores my soul. He guides me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. The Lord provides restoration. The Lord provides guidance. "Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you're with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me." The Lord provides courage. The Lord provides comfort. "You prepare a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. You anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows." The Lord provides supply. The Lord provides protection. The Lord provides power. "Surely goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever." The Lord provides mercy. You know, that was a very traumatic time in my family's life. The next few days, so many people came through our family to share their condolences. We went from having no money at all to people just providing us with so many things that we needed, that we were able to get through that initial period. We knew that we were dependent on God. There was just no other option for us. And so we depended upon God, and God was faithful. But you know, I think it was more than just God getting us through that season, because for me, it was that building block in my life that says whatever situation and circumstance that I come across, I can trust that the Lord is my shepherd. That whatever it is, he will be there and he will help me to work through that. And that's a wonderful thing to do. It's a truth that I'm very grateful that I learnt at 14 years of age. But whether you're 14 or 44 or 62, as somebody in our congregation is today, or I'm not saying who, I'm with Joan, or 80, it doesn't matter when. We need to take that as a building block of our own life. And I can remember as this kid getting up at the Chinchilla Baptist Church, a 14-year-old. Took me months and months to prepare the sermon. I was wondered why it only went for 15 minutes. But the thing that I was able to say was this, that when I started preparing this message, I thought I knew that the Lord was my shepherd. But as I spoke in that service, I say, I know without a doubt, with all my heart, that the Lord is my shepherd. Not only does God want to be our shepherd, and you might be sitting there thinking about all these wonderful things that God will do with us, but it's a two-way relationship because we also need to follow the shepherd. We also need to accept what he wants to offer into our lives. We actually need to allow that picture to sink in. It's not only about God supplying all our needs, it's about us as his sheep following him, responding to his call, allowing him to be in charge of our life. The author Philip Keller describes the emphasis of this as being utterly contented in the Good Shepherd's care and consequently not craving after or desiring anything more. I think Jesus knew that when he talked in John 10 verse 27. He said, "My sheep listen to my voice. I know them and they follow me." We need to actually think about the psalm in terms of whether not only what God can do for us, but are we prepared to follow him? Are we prepared to be the sheep in his pastures? It seems to me that we can become anxious about lots of things. It seems to me that we can have many problems as well as trials in our life. Let me just say as a word of testimony that to come to God and allow him to work in our life is important. He might not solve things in the way that we might think we would like to, but that relationship of fearing no evil because he's with us is very true and very real. I think God challenged me at 14 whether I was prepared to let him be the shepherd of my life. For the next, 54 years, it has been a journey where I have never regretted that. There have been green pastures, sure. There have been valleys of the shadow of death, but God's always been there. And that's not just meant to be for individuals who happen to be fortunate. That's meant to be for all of us. And so what I want to do to finish our sermon this morning is to actually give you a chance to respond to the 23rd Psalm. I really appreciate the technical people. They've gone to lots of troubles to make this work. We're actually going to watch on the screen a YouTube playing of a song called "The Lord is My Shepherd." It's a paraphrase of Psalm 23 by a fellow called Stuart Townend. And if you listen to the words, you will see those 6 verses there. And I want you just to sit and to take it in and think about those words. But the other thing I want you to notice is that after each verse there's a chorus. And the key words in the chorus say, "I will trust in you alone." And what I want you to do, you can do it quietly so that nobody can hear. You might want to speak the word. You might even want to sing the word in that part. But whatever way that you want to do it, it's not between us so much as between you and God. Here is a chance for us to affirm or even to take hold of the fact that we want to have the Lord as our shepherd and that we will follow him and we'll trust him alone. So this is a time of reflection and meditation. We'll play the song and then respond in that way.
The Lord's my shepherd, I'll not want. He makes me lie in pastures green. He leads me by the still, still waters. His goodness restores my soul. And I will trust in you. And I will trust in you alone. For your endless mercy follows me. Your goodness will lead me home. He guides my ways in righteousness, and He anoints my head with oil, and my cup it overflows with joy. I feast on His pure delights, and I will trust in you. And I will trust in you alone. For your endless mercy follows me. Your goodness will lead me home. And though I walk the darkest path, I will not fear the evil one. For you are with me, and your rod and staff are the comfort I need to know. And I will trust in you. And I will trust in you alone. For your endless mercy follows me. Your goodness will lead me home. And I will trust, and I will trust in you alone. And I will trust in you alone. For your endless mercy follows me. Your goodness will lead me home. For your endless mercy. For your endless mercy follows me. Your goodness will lead me home.
Now may the God of peace, who brought back from the dead our Lord Jesus, the great shepherd of the sheep, by the blood of the eternal covenant, make you complete in everything good, so that you may do His will, working among us that which is pleasing in His sight, through Jesus Christ, to whom be the glory forever and ever. Amen.